Hello folks, if you haven't already seen the first video in this series, quick disclaimer, this video might not make much sense if you don't watch the first one, so go ahead and give that a watch. I'll probably link it in the description in the comment section down below so that you can't miss it. So yeah, if you haven't seen the first video, go watch that, then come back. Okay, let's go. So, if you've seen the initial video of this series, you'll know that we're talking about how to go from having no E5s at all to having the perfect team, using the tried and tested Eloise strategy. So, hopefully if you're keeping up to date with this little video walkthrough, you should have an Eloise, an Ithaca, a Tix, a carry, maybe on Kiramaru instead of Ithaca, depends on where you're at. There'll be a Fairy Queen Vesa as your first Transcendence hero, and you've got a few 9-stars in there as well, like Waldeck and Drake, and you probably maybe have a 9-star Rogan, but you definitely have a 9-star Ignis to support your Eloise, and you're probably thinking, hang on a second, that's a lot of heroes. What the heck do I do now? Well, when you get yourself a Fairy Queen Vesa, one hero is super duper important, because one of two things have happened. Either you used Garuda to clear Forest Seal Land, or you got rid of Garuda really early on to build maybe the Tix, the Ithaca, the carry, whatever, or even to build the Eloise really quickly. You built an E5 Garuda, then got rid of her straight away. Regardless, if you've got rid of your Garuda and haven't got Seal Land 20 cleared, that's something you need to prioritize when you go ahead and build Fairy Queen Vesa, because there's a thing that people don't know, and it's this. The Seal Land allows you to go and fight the different factions with your heroes from those factions. The problem is, a lot of people forget time and time again that Transcendence is its own faction, and you can only use a Transcendence hero from its original faction if you've achieved Seal Land 20 or higher. I constantly see people saying, oh, why can't I put my Vesa or my Swordflash in Seal Land? And the answer is you haven't cleared it to Seal Land 20. So one thing we need to stress immediately is we're going to need Forest heroes to make sure that we've done Forest Seal Land. Now, if you built Garuda as your first hero and you decided to keep her around for some reason, you can go ahead and Void for her and she will do Seal Land just fine. So that's good. If you've already done the Seal Land with the Garuda, fantastic. You don't need to worry about this step. But, of course, for those of you that haven't, you're going to need somebody else that can. And in my opinion, Rogan is an absolutely fantastic addition. Whether you've done Seal Land or not, he is definitely going to be our next E5 hero. For two reasons. First of all, he is a tenant for Fairy Queen Vesa. Very, very important that later down the line we have him set up if we want to use Vesa as a main damage dealer to support our Eloise. In addition, he is just a fantastic hero with some brilliant support. Warpath Roar is offering you speed, crit damage, and later on it'll give you attack and crit for your heroes. All you need to do is have Rogan survive, and his active skill gives Bloodthirsty to an ally, which gives them some inbuilt healing and some extra damage. Fantastic abilities to go ahead and shove on your team. So yeah, I do like going and building a Rogan in this next step. But now we need to start thinking about what heroes are going to be our next Transcendence heroes, and this is more important to do with artifacts than anything else. In the last video, I outlined the importance of getting yourself a Splendid Melodic Strings, and that still holds true. It's very important to have a Splendid Melodic Strings as a good damage-dealing artifact. It will support your Tix, it will allow Vesa to deal damage, it will allow Ithaca to deal a lot of damage in broken spaces. It's just a brilliant artifact to have. But if you've seen any of my older videos talking about artifacts, you would probably think at this point you want to go and get yourself Splendid Demon Bells. In fact, 2 Splendid Demon Bells, because this will provide energy feed. If you don't know what energy feed is, it basically is using the energy outburst ability of a Demon Bell, which means whenever the hero with Demon Bell does an active skill, they'll give energy to the rest of your team, and if you have enough Demon Bells doing this, you can hopefully bring heroes up to 100 energy, allowing them to do an active skill in round 1, whilst not actually having an energy artifact themselves. A very, very cool technique. Now, there are some ways to min-max this. Instead of using 2 Splendid Demon Bells, you use 2 Radiant and 1 Glittery, but that requires 3 of your fastest heroes to be wearing the Demon Bells. So this is good if you don't have initial energy on your heroes, but thanks to the release of Melodic Strings, it's a lot less important. So you don't need to jump on the 8 Demon Bells straight away. In fact, the artifact I want to draw your attention to next is Ruyi Scepter. Now, this may take you by surprise. Ruyi Scepter is not a straight-up intuitive artifact to build early, but it's a very good one. It gives a lot of speed, it gives good HP, and more importantly, it gives control precision and control immunity offset when it's upgraded. This allows you to cut through an opponent's ability to not be CC'd, which means crowd controlled, and allow you to crowd control them more reliably, whether it's with Holmes Young's Shape Change, or whether it's with something more potent like a Freeze or Petrify from a Star Wing Jara, or even Horrify from the hero we're going to focus on today. And that hero is Lord of Fear, Aspen. Well, the reason we want a Receptor is because of this guy. He is going to hopefully be your second Transcendence hero if you take one of the two available paths I'm outlining in this video. This I would call the traditional route, which is all driven by the fact that you've got that Splendid Melodic Strings and you get a Splendid Receptor. With a Lord of Fear Aspen wearing a Receptor, he's going to have a very high chance that he can inflict Fear Abyssal Gaze on opponents, which prevents them from using their basic attacks and only lets them do active skills if they have enough energy. This is really strong because it can totally shut an opponent down, and then it's combined with his ability to steal energy from feared enemies to potentially lock them down pretty much for the entire fight. Combine this with a hero who is naturally quick and give him a Receptor to make this more consistent, you have a very, very potent CC hero. Now, crowd control is an excellent effect to have on your team, but does play a little bit against Eloise, so we're going to probably want someone else to be our main damage dealer. And that's where the sneaky trick of swapping your Fairy Queen Vesa out when you get a second Transcendence hero comes into play. As mentioned briefly in the last video, Lord of Fear Aspen is a slot 2 tenant for Sword Flash. And Sword Flash is one of the best damage dealing heroes in the game, but one problem with her is she requires a lot of support to do well. She wants a good upgraded Celestial Island house, and of course she needs artifacts to back her up. But fortunately, the release of Melodic Strings makes giving her an active skill a lot easier. So what we want to do here is get that Lord of Fear Aspen so that you can have him as a tenant. But as well, we need to start looking at other tenants. So if you plan on building a Sword Flash, you need to start thinking about other heroes to help. Now, Onkiramaru is definitely a choice here. If you didn't build him earlier, you can go ahead and swap maybe your Eloise or your Ithaca to Onkiramaru when you get the Sword Flash. So all that requires you to do is have 9 copies of Onkiramaru ready for that switch up and 5 Soul Stones to make that a reality. In addition, you're probably wanting to get yourself a Fiona, as Fiona is the best tenant for tenant spot 1 for a Sword Flash. But that is going to leave us with the previous problem as last time, which is, hang on a second, I've not beaten Fortress Sealand. And as we said earlier, there's no point building a Transcendence hero if you haven't got their Sealand beaten. So if we take a look at the Fortress faction, you'll be surprised to know there's a lot of good picks here to do Sealand. For example, you could build a Penny. Penny is a hero you could have built early on in this strategy, done Fortress Sealand with, and then got rid of. That's something a lot of people like to do if you naturally get 9 copies of Penny when you're going through the journey of the first video, in where we outlined how to get to your first Transcendence hero. So if in that time you do manage to get 9 copies of Penny, excellent. Go ahead and use those to do Fortress Sealand. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe you get a lot of copies of someone like Holmes Young. Holmes Young is a brilliant crowd control hero. A lot of people like to throw him in on their accounts. He's going to be really good with that Receptor. Once you don't have Lord of Fear Aspen, if you do build the Receptor a little too soon, so that's good as well. It's going to improve his shape change ability. And moreover, he's a really reliable Sealand clearer, as good as Eloise. You can just slap a golden crown on him, which we hopefully already picked up if you watched the last video, and you can go ahead and use this Holmes Young to do Sealand 20 in the Fortress faction. But if you don't have either of those options, don't just jump on the Fiona straight away. One thing you might want to go ahead and do is actually build Sia. She is needed anyway if you plan on building Sword Flash. Sia at Void 4 should be able to clear Sealand. It might be tricky, and you might need some additional support, maybe from 5-star Bleakers to go ahead and crowd control opponents. You can find this guy down here. When he dies, he stuns someone. Maybe because it's Fortress Sealand and the enemy isn't too quick, you can go with Fire Fists wearing energy, but ultimately there will be a way that you can bump up a Sia enough to allow her to clear Sealand. So that's a few E5s for you to consider building whilst you're making your journey from your first Transcendence hero to your second. Of course, in this time, stick with Eloise, but what happens when we do finally get to Sword Flash, or who do we need to build preemptively as well to make the most out of this Sword Flash? Well, the key thing about Sword Flash is this ability right here called Impeccable Flow. Impeccable Flow allows her, when she does an active skill, to deal damage to everybody instead of just one target, and she pretends that all the enemies are that one target, so she deals a ton of damage to the entire opposing team. But to trigger Impeccable Flow, you need Sword Flash to get a kill on an opponent early on, and her active skill will normally target the enemy with the lowest HP. So what we do with the Sword Flash is we stick a melodic strings on her, allowing her to do an active skill in round 1, targeting the lowest HP enemy. This is where that E5 Rogan you built earlier will also come into play, because he will improve Sword Flash's crit damage and later on her attack and crit, but that might not be enough to guarantee the kill. So last time we outlined building a 9-star Drake to support you in broken spaces, but this Drake will also serve as an additional assistance hero with a Sword Flash. If you do plan on making Sword Flash plus Lord of Fear Aspen your 2 Transcendence heroes when you get to 2 Transcendence heroes, what you will want is an E5 Drake, so he's another hero to think about building up to E5 before you get that Sword Flash in. That will allow you to go ahead and debuff the lowest HP opponent, allowing Sword Flash to get that kill much easier in round 1. Then you get buffed by the Rogan, who gives you more attack and more crit. You have impeccable flow, and Sword Flash goes off with an active skill in round 2. But now raises the question, how do we enable the active skill in round 2? Well, remember that 9-star Ignis we built to support the LOEs? If you bump her to 10-star, she can go ahead and give 100 energy to the ally she's next to, just as if she would if she died, but this time with an active skill. So you can go ahead and have Sword Flash do an active skill round 1 with the melodic strings, and then have Ignis next to her do an active skill and feed 100 energy to her. Even better if the Ignis dies, and then suddenly Sword Flash is on 200 energy and gets a little bit of extra skill damage when she pops off her active skill, because you get more skill damage the more energy you have over 100. This again allows Sword Flash to deal even more damage with that active, guaranteeing that she clears out the opposing wave. When we combine this with the crowd control from Lord of Fear Aspen locking down opponents, we will have a strategy that is absolutely phenomenal and will clear Void Vortex. Even if you've powered up that Sword Flash enough, you might even be able to clear the entire of Vanquisher, and that's with just 2 Transcendence heroes. So to go ahead and do all that, let me quickly recap in case it went over your head. You're going to need an E5 Rogan, an E5 Drake. You're going to need 10-star Ignis to feed energy. Ideally, you could even take her up to E5 if you wanted. And you're going to need the tenants for Sword Flash by switching one of your shadow heroes, whether it's Ithaca or the LOEs, which you will eventually stop using, into an On-Kiramaru. Maybe you already had him, in which case that's okay. And as well, you're going to want to build Fiona, but ensure that when you do build that Sword Flash, you've used a normal Seer, if you haven't already cleared Fortress Sealand, to make sure it's been dealt with. With that, you will hopefully have 3 tenants there for Sword Flash, and then once the Sword Flash is in, and if you haven't already had the time to, you want to build your final tenant, which will be this hero here, Gloria. Gloria is nothing special. She is simply just a hero to be a tenant. That is her only purpose. So just build her with an attack stone to give as much attack into Sword Flash, and away you go. So just to be clear, to make this all possible, what we will want to do is go to the evolution cube and replace your Fairy Queen Vesa with the Seer, which will give you just a normal Vesa and leave you with a Sword Flash. Also, that normal Vesa could then potentially be swapped to one of the forest heroes that we talked about, whether it's Gloria, maybe it's even a second Rogan, whatever works for you to give you more power on your Sword Flash. So that there is the Sword Flash Lord of Fear Aspen strategy as you approach your second Transcendence hero. You can probably notice I'm being a little looser now with my guides, because hopefully at this point you know how to play the game, and it's just a matter of who do you build and why. So they're the heroes to focus on, and don't forget the melodic strings and the Receptor as well to make this work. Once you already have the Receptor, by that point you then do want to focus on Demon Bells to ensure that you have some amount of energy feed going into your team so that you have more consistent active skills, which is going to help you in the long run. And then as you come back and turn towards your third Transcendence hero, you can either bring back Fairy Queen Vesa so that you can use Lord of Fear Aspen Sword Flash and Fairy Queen Vesa together, which will be a really good team for the Void campaign, or you could even go ahead and use Starwing Jara if you get a second Receptor to give you really good control. In fact, you don't even need that second Receptor. You could stick a Demon Bell on the Lord of Fear Aspen, and then Jara will still get energy fed because she energy feeds herself as well, and she will lock down opponents. So they're just some thoughts for your third Transcendence hero, but of course, hopefully by the point of you building a third Transcendence hero, you don't need me to tell you who to build. So with all that covered, what is the other strategy? What happens if you don't want to go ahead and build Sword Flash? Because for a lot of people, that's the case. They actually have really enjoyed using Eloise, and Fairy Queen Vesa has been a support, but maybe you're getting to the point now where you want to start leaning towards Fairy Queen Vesa as a damage dealer. After all, we did build that Rogan to go ahead and be a tenant for the Fairy Queen Vesa. So who else do we need to consider? Well, one neat trick with Eloise is you don't necessarily have to go all in on an Eloise. Yes, it helps when you're doing things like Sealand 25 or you're really trying to push her to her best, but tenant spots 1 and 2 aren't that great. Now, it should be mentioned that if we are going to stick with Eloise, building a Jara is really, really important. Getting Jara on the account will be the best tenant for tenant spot 2, and by this point, hopefully complete tenant spots 1, 2, 3, and 4. Whether you built Ithaca or Onkiramaru in spot 1, and then you add the Jara, you should have the ticks and the carry. There you go, full house. But who do we go ahead and build next? Or what's this thing about splitting your homes? Well, tenant spot 3 and 4 are just good. Ticks and carry are excellent tenants, and they're very strong heroes. I like them a lot. I will want to keep them around on the account and never get rid of them. But tenant spots 1 and 2 is a little iffier. The Onkiramaru is a nice side tenant, and a Jara will probably want to be a Starwing Jara at some point, but you don't necessarily have to stick in with these if you want to get the best of both worlds and use Fairy Queen Vesa. So what you can go ahead and do is take a look at Fairy Queen Vesa's tenants, and you'll see in tenant spot 1 we have Rogan, a hero we will want to build to E5 anyway and should hopefully have at this point. Then you look at tenant spot 2, the one that's the weakest for Eloise, and realize that, oh, hello, we've got some interesting choices. Sword Flash shows her face. Now, would it be worth building her as a second Transcendence hero? Maybe, but if you were going to do that, I would much rather you had a Lord of Fear Aspen instead of a Fairy Queen Vesa. So what about the other option? Well, Xiaohu, yes, he is a very solid hero. Xiaohu is a very good hero for coming in and just giving you support in Forest Sealand, but he's difficult to make work. Xiaohu needs your team to block for him to be good, and that's hard to make happen in the early and mid game, and you probably don't really want to be using him too much. But then we have Mystic Fairy Freya as our third choice, and Mystic Fairy Freya is an incredible hero. Mystic Fairy Freya is a unique Transcendence hero because she offers a lot of support which you can typically only get from artifacts. If you take a look at her passives, you'll see that Mystic Fairy Freya is offering you all damage reduction just like a crown would do, but also boosting the attack of your team. And if you go so far to improve evolutionary factor, she's going to buff herself with an ability that progressively improves the damage she does to poisoned enemies. As well, the fact she poisons opponents is really nice because this synergizes with a monster. If you were to consider building the Snake, this gives you extra damage against poisoned opponents. So if you go ahead and use Freya, you can poison opponents and make the most out of this using a Snake, which is a very, very good later game strategy that even I implement on my main account. That said, it's probably not worth rushing a Snake just yet. It was just something to consider. But the main thing I wanted to point you at with Mystic Fairy Freya is the fact that she's able to give even more attack when she's done enough active skills with evolutionary factor. As you can see, it's 20% extra attack here, and she also grants a shield to your allies, not dissimilar from Fairy Queen Vesa. So this means that Mystic Fairy Freya and Fairy Queen Vesa will be offering support and protection to your team through shields. As well, add to that the damage reduction and control immunity and other bonuses you get from a Mystic Fairy Freya, your team will just massively feel much more improved. So I really love Mystic Fairy Freya, and she's going to help you as well in the Forest Sealand if you wanted to lean towards Vesa in there, which is going to get you a lot of progress, and you might even find that your Forest Sealand overtakes where you've managed to go in the Shadow faction. So yeah, I really enjoy this, and I think this is a good hero to put in tenant spot 2 for a Vesa. So if we use the Rogan as our first tenant for Vesa, and we use Mystic Fairy Freya as our second tenant when we get to our second Transcendence hero, you will have at this point tenant spot 3 and 4 covered for Eloise, 1 and 2 covered for Vesa, and then you just kind of ignore the other ones and just make sure you upgrade those houses, and that's called half building houses, where you have half in on one hero, half in on the other. I like this strategy if you've got a lot of Master's Toolboxes, and it really does lean in nicely. Now, if you're capped on Master's Toolboxes, you can go ahead and build them both in homes. That's actually totally fine too, and for that reason, we're going to want maybe some more heroes as well to act as tenants. So other heroes to consider building would be a Flora in tenant spot 3, as she is the best tenant here, and she's a lot easier to obtain than Arania, and in tenant spot 4, Freya, because she's the only one there that isn't Transcendent, and it's kind of hard to have 3 Transcendence heroes on an account straight away. At some point, you will want to get Jara to be your tenant for Fairy Queen Vesa, but let's just assume that you grab Freya just because it's easier. And at that point, you've probably got a decent looking account. And if you wanted to lean in on maybe Star Expedition, or maybe do some more damage in Broken Spaces to make it easier to clear Broken Spaces 8 and 9, or even go ahead and clear Forest Seal Land to the best of your abilities, there's 1 or maybe even 2 additional heroes I want you to consider. The first hero is Olivia. I love Olivia. I think she's one of the most underrated heroes in the game, and she has one of the most powerful skill effects in the game, called Shrink. This reduces the damage an opponent can deal to you, but improves the damage you deal to them. This is fantastic in boss fights, it's exceptionally good in Star Expedition fights, and it is just really solid in Seal Land as well, because you can shrink the opposing boss in Seal Land who normally cannot be CC'd, but crowd control and skill effects are 2 different things. So yeah, Olivia is a really solid hero, and I think she's definitely worth considering if you can squeeze her into your build order. On top of that, similar to the Sword Flash route, I would want you to probably build Ignis to E5 at this point, because Ignis at E5 supports Vesa really nicely in the Star Expedition and can help you in the Realms Gate as well, just as a solid hero to feed energy. She's a very reliable healer, energy feeder, and often the crowd control really comes into play as well. Now, one strategy people like to do is actually build an Ignis separately to their 9-star Ignis, because they still want that Ignis to die and give control protection to their Eloise or to whatever hero it is that you want to focus that in. Typically it will be Eloise though. But if you go ahead and build an Ignis to E5, you may do that at the cost of your 9-star Ignis, who you would build up. It's a lot harder to kill an E5 than it is to kill a 9-star hero. So you may find that that Ignis doesn't die fast enough, and also you don't really want them to die. You want them to feed energy through her active skill. That's why we built her to E5 after all. So the 2 different purposes of the Ignis are now counter-opposed to each other, so often it's better to build a second E5 Ignis separate to the 9-star you built initially. So that's one thing I would definitely consider if you wanted to go down the Fairy Queen Vesa and Mystic Fairy Freya route, because that's going to give you an E5 Ignis to support the Vesa, whilst also having a 9-star to help the Eloise. So why would you choose the Mystic Fairy Freya path over the Sword Flash path? Well, that's a very good question. I think the Sword Flash path is better than the Mystic Fairy Freya path because going Sword Flash plus Lord of Fear Aspen allows you to clear more game modes. However, I am aware that for a lot of you budget players, it is difficult to get a Splendid Melodic Strings and a Splendid Ruyi Scepter in the time it takes you to get to 2 Transcendence heroes. Now, some of you may find this easy depending on where you start, so of course, then it's not really a choice. It's definitely go for Sword Flash. Also, some of you may not want to grab Ruyi Scepter. You may decide that you want to delay that and go for the Ruyi Scepter hero maybe as your 3rd or 4th Transcendence hero, which I would understand. Maybe you really enjoy Star Expedition, a game mode which I've covered quite intently. Now, Star Expedition is easy to do with a Vesa if you build her right, and you can even go ahead and grab just maybe a glittery Antlers Cane to do this. You don't have to build it to Splendid, but yeah, just 2 Antlers Canes can improve your damage there. With the Ignis, you can give yourself energy feed, and then all you'll have to do is throw in some carries to die and use some of the strategies available that I've covered in this channel already to go ahead and use that Fairy Queen Vesa to deal a lot more damage than you would do if you were using the Sword Flash. Some people really like Star Expedition, and that's okay. Another reason to go ahead and focus on the Mystic Fairy Freya team over the Sword Flash strategy is because you want your energy feed first. You don't want the Ruyi Scepter. You want to get your Demon Bells in and energy feed. And energy feed works really nicely with Mystic Fairy Freya. It's a very good strategy. Or maybe you just want to use Fairy Queen Vesa and Eloise because you really like them and you've enjoyed using them and don't want to move away from that. So that's also okay too. I'm not telling you have to choose a Sword Flash strategy or the Mystic Fairy Freya strategy. One or the other are perfectly fine, they just have different strengths in different areas of the game. As I said, the Sword Flash strategy will get you more progress in places like the Vortex and Void campaign, which is probably where your attention should lie because that's going to be more resources for you in the long term. But some people don't care about that stuff. Other people just want to make that Eloise team as strong as they possibly can, and as I said, if you don't have the Ruyi Scepter, it seems quite tricky to justify building a Lord of Fear Aspen. And as well, for the Sword Flash, you have to remember she's going to want the Rogan, the Drake, those tenants. It's a lot to go and switch things up, and it can be quite heavy on your soul symbols too to go and make that switch up. So again, I understand if it was something you were reluctant to do, and building a Mystic Fairy Freya already plays into the decisions you've made on the account, as opposed to switching things up entirely when you get to 2 Transcendence heroes. So hopefully today's video has given you that coverage on who to think about, and there's only really one more hero to talk about, and that's actually this first hero we spoke about today, Rogan. Build a second one. 2 Rogans is really, really good. In fact, you know how I said Sword Flash gets buffed up by 1 Rogan? Well, that's true for 2, so you can double buff a Sword Flash with those Rogans, and they can hold the Demon Bells as well to energy feed her. Really nice strat. And in the case of Vesa, 2 Rogans are going to support her in Forest Seal Land really nicely, and with the Olivia and the Mystic Fairy Freya, Seal Land clears should actually be super easy with double Rogan and Vesa too. So yeah, really solid selection of heroes. Maybe the Freya in there as well, the Seer, who if you built him, probably would go with just a normal Freya, because she's 10 at spot 4, and she's just a good hero that gives shields too. So I'd consider that. And there you go, 6 heroes to help you in Forest Seal Land. Really nice. Another artifact to actually consider on that point is getting yourself Golden Crown to Splendid. Finally finishing this bad boy, or even just getting some more, because that's just a really solid artifact that's going to keep your heroes alive in Forest Seal Land. I know I said that Mystic Fairy Freya gives you support and damage reduction, but that may not be enough. Maybe just sticking some bog standard Golden Crowns on your support heroes could be pretty good just to keep that Rogan and that Freya and that Olivia alive. Of course, energy feed is also really reliable, as that's going to help the Freya, so it's finding a balance between those things to maximize your performance. And of course, Melodic Strings on Vesa is just very nice, because that's going to give your team shields, which will keep you safe, and it will put Vesa's active skills 1 round ahead. Either way, that's a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to consider. Today was a little more loose than the first video, and that was intentional. It's to give you guys a sense that, you know, a lot of the decisions you make now are personal to you. It's hopefully strategy informed, and this is more hopefully giving you things to think about, as opposed to have handheld you towards your first Transcendence hero. If you prefer this style of video, let me know. If you want something a little more rigorous, then just follow the Sword Flash strategy and blindly get those 4 Receptors, and hopefully that's enough for you guys to go and find yourself an account with 2 Transcendence heroes. And at this point, I let go. I don't want to handheld you all the way to 3, 4, 5 Transcendence heroes. Things will change as you progress through the game. Of course, new heroes will come out, different strategies will emerge, and really it starts to become a lot more personal to you. And I guess my final closing statement is the reason I make these videos, the reason I guide you through the early game, is so that you can get to the mid game as fast as possible, because then you have the freedom to have a good account with good resources and flexibly choose the things that you want. Also, by following the Eloise strategy, you learn good principles and practices, which you can then apply if you were to deviate from the Eloise strategy. Instead of Eloise, you could use a Noske or Waldeck and follow the same rules of using their tenets and then seeing what Transcendence heroes would align with those tenets. If you see, Halora has a lot of tenets in common with Waldeck, and Anoske's tenets, or the heroes needed for him, are fantastically synergistic with a Sword Flash. So if you're creative, you can find solutions using those heroes instead of blindly following Eloise. The next video in this series is going to be refining the initial video with some professional advanced tips, advanced tricks that I wouldn't normally say to a new player, but that if you implement will slightly adjust your progress forwards and give you a little bit of an edge against those just blindly following the guide. So if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time, and of course, happy idling.